little bit of musical chairs this morning. Friends, please pray with me. Again. Oh God, speak to us this morning through ancient story and ancient words. Perhaps, maybe even in these words, we trust that you might have a word for us. Amen. So it might seem a bit of a strange thing in the midst of so much that is happening in the world that we are talking today about the disruption of ceasing, the disruption of stopping and pausing at a time when, indeed, there's a lot to do. Yesterday was a day full of a lot of different types of disruptions. I know some of you took part in various things happening in many, many places, and I've heard from some of you, and thank you for your witness. Thank you for standing up, indeed, for the dignity of all. And in this time, as ironic as it may seem, I feel that this is a word that we all need right now. Because it's easy when we are doing so much and it feels like indeed the world is on fire and that our own country is on fire. It's easy to simply run around and do everything at a frantic pace because even if we did that, we would never do it all. We would never complete it all. And sometimes we are disrupted in order to eventually become disruptors ourselves. I want to share this brief story with you. I had such a moment once when I was about 24 years old. My life had been a fairly frantic pace. I had been serving as a campus minister for a pretty conservative Christian organization, and I loved my job, and I was pretty good at my job. I, for whatever reason, had a way of being able to do this job with ease, and it sort of flowed out of me with everything that I was. I had been, for whatever reason, identified as sort of an emerging leader and given the accolades therein within this organization. And a big disruption came within the midst of that when I was 24 and about 2 years into this kind of service, going at pretty much a nonstop pace. And this interruption came when I finally came out as LGBTQ. And the brakes halted. And some of you know this story. At that time in 1997, and truthfully still today, if this had been the case, I was fired then and I would be fired now within this particular organization and in some of the states where that still happens on a regular basis. But for me at that time, I couldn't see anything. Could not see ahead much at all, and I had no idea who I would be without my job and without this ministry that I loved. And I was thinking about this yesterday at the Pride Parade, where my family and I were with other friends and their children, and thinking, this has been almost 30 years ago, and remembering that it took me a good 10 years to be willing to show my face at any kind of Pride Parade long after coming out. And let's be honest, at that time, Pride parades in the South were sort of a few people in a field with some singers and maybe a speaker. Things have certainly changed. But a few months after this huge disruption came, I was literally sitting on a rock in the middle of a stream. I'd spent a lot of time in the woods and in the wilderness at this time, but I was sitting there on the rock and trying to pray. And the words of the catechism of my youth came back to me. And it simply said this. Well, this is one of the times I'm grateful I was made to memorize the entire catechism. The first question in the catechism I was taught simply says this: what is the chief end of man? Now we would probably say, what is the chief end of people? The answer at that time was simply to know God and enjoy God forever. To know God and enjoy God forever. And it hit me in that moment like a ton of bricks that was it. I didn't have to save the world. I didn't have to change the world. I didn't have to save the church. I didn't have to do some great thing. I didn't have to be all the things that I was told I needed to be, and that if I did nothing else but sit on this rock, that was enough. That the chief end of life was to know God and enjoy God forever. What I couldn't know at the time is that my whole life had been disrupted in part so that I would eventually become a disruptor. And I regularly go back to that time on the rock to remember that if nothing else exists, that is true, and that will always be true. And to remember that what that is about, knowing God and loving God and enjoying God forever, is about love, and that is all that matters. And that if all the things that we do in the world, if they're not grounded from that place of being and that place of love, then they are not effective, that they are indeed actually reckless. God disrupted me that I might eventually become a different kind of disruptor. Jesus lived a life of disruption. We see this in many of the things that he did, some very blatant and some more subtle. Jesus disrupted in many of the following ways. When he bent down in the dirt and began writing in the dirt, when the woman who was caught in adultery was brought to him and the people were asking, what should the penalty be? He bent down, he took all eyes off of her, put all the eyes on himself. He was a disruptor. Jesus disrupted when he overturned the tables of the money changers outside of the temple. Jesus disrupted when he resisted the calls to become a ruler, to become a king, to become a kind of warrior that they could understand. Jesus disrupted when he decided to include women in the movement, in the early Christ movement. Jesus disrupted when he defied the social strata of Rome and the household codes of order and submission by which Rome kept Pax Romana. Jesus disrupted when he rose from the dead. Indeed, the resurrection was a disruption. But the other regular way that Jesus disrupted was to draw away and to pray, to sit some things out, to rest, to regroup, to reground. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. And the same is true for us. In the first few centuries of the church, Christians were a minority. We probably know this. They were suspect. There was this group of people that worshiped this man/God who had died and that they claimed came back to life. And then on top of that, these Christians had a custom of sharing a meal that they claimed was the body and the blood of the crucified and resurrected Jesus. It was suspect. Perhaps it was a cult, maybe involving cannibalism. It was unknown. Not to mention that they did not follow the hierarchies of the Roman Empire, and they practiced sharing power and leadership. This was highly suspect. But then something changed. The Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, and in short order, the faith went from suspect to central, from a movement of outsiders to a form of government, from house churches to basilicas, and priests began to wear clothing of royalty and wealth. The Christians had gone from being the ones oppressed to being the ones with power. And within this, there were a small group of Christians who decided to take it back to their roots, to take things back and to withdraw from all of this. And they went to the desert to live simply, sometimes in isolation and sometimes in community. They were the desert mothers and fathers, the first monastics. Now, the desert mothers and fathers remind us of many things, but perhaps the most important for us now is they remind us to not give in to the franticness of the culture, to not conflate our worth and value with our productivity or our status or our achievements. And not that these things are negative in and of themselves, but it's when we ascribe our sense of okayness to them that they become a problem. The desert mothers and the fathers remind us of the holy disruption of hitting pause, of the need for rest and retreat and the centrality and holy power of our relationship with God and others. There are many ways that any of us can disrupt in this time, and there are indeed many things that need disruption, and we cannot do them all. Some will march, as I know a lot of you did yesterday. Some will bring food and water to those who march. Some will make phone calls, and some will keep home sane so others can go and do those things. And some, and we can't have enough of this, will pray and pray and pray. And some will build more community among their neighbors, knowing that community and connection naturally deter some vulnerability to authoritarianism. There's a writer and a theologian named Tricia Hersey who wrote a book called Rest as Resistance, and she sums this up in this way. Loving ourselves and each other deepens our disruption to the dominant systems. They want us unwell, fearful, exhausted, and without deep self-love, because you are easier to manipulate when you are distracted by what is not real or true. We are about to enter another time of disruption, moving from this space where we have worshiped for 80 some years now, just as it is, into a liminal space, into our fellowship hall. I invite us all to see this as not simply a time of waiting until we can get back in here, but to actually breathe into this space and to welcome what it can teach us as we are in also a time of disruption. There's much to learn in these times, and I can tell you that your worship staff and your music staff look very forward to what this space has for us as we do worship in some new ways, some creative ways, as we give ourselves permission to experience and to embrace this disruption. And also, friends, this week, in the midst of all the things, and who knows what else might unfold, who knows what else might happen, I invite you to remember above every single thing that you are a child of God, that no matter your achievements or status or ability, no matter your age or your stage, you are a beloved one in the eyes of God before anything. So consider, if you will, being a disruptor by taking 1 to 5 minutes a day, 1 to 5 minutes a day, to pray, maybe even to be alone if at all possible, to unplug, to breathe, to ask God to calm your heart, to calm your nervous system, and to help you trust that this too is part of the call, the work, that this too is part of the resistance. This too is part of what it means to change the world through love, compassion, and courage. If you need a prayer, to pray to help with this, maybe try this one. God, disrupt me with reminders of your love for me as I seek to be a holy disruptor with your love. Amen.